Have you ever felt like you see things others don't? Patterns, emotions, unspoken truths, hiding just beneath the surface. But what if this ability isn't a gift, but a curse? Today, we explore the psychology of the intuitive introvert, the quiet observer who sees too much, feels too much, and wonders if something's wrong with them. Carl Jung understood this kind of mind because he had one, and his ideas may finally explain what you've been carrying all your life. Carl Jung once said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." There are some people who walk through the world quietly, not because they have nothing to say, but because they're already carrying too much. These are the intuitive introverts. They don't just observe, they absorb, and for them, the world is never simple. They notice what others ignore. They hear what's left unsaid. They feel the weight of a room the moment they step into it. To them, silence is not empty. It's loaded with meaning. This way of being, this depth of perception, might seem like a gift, but often it doesn't feel like one. Because in a world that avoids depth, that glorifies speed, simplicity, and surface-level connection, clarity can become a curse. The painful clarity. For some, visions are painfully clear, not in the mystical sense, but in the deeply psychological one. They see patterns unfold in real time. They know when someone is lying, even if that person believes their own words. They feel the emotional undercurrents in a conversation others call normal. They're rarely surprised because they often see the end before others even recognize the beginning. But when you see too much, feel too deeply, sense what others deny or suppress, it doesn't always feel like power. It feels like burden, isolation, silence. Because what do you do with a truth no one else sees? What do you say when everyone is celebrating the surface, and you can already see what's breaking underneath it? You learn not to say anything at all. You nod, you smile, you play along. But the inner world keeps observing. Jung's map of the inner world. Carl Jung wasn't just a psychologist, he was an architect of the psyche. He proposed that each person perceives the world through different cognitive functions. Some are thinkers, some are feelers, some rely on sensation, what they can touch, hear, see. Others, however, operate primarily through intuition. Intuition, in Jung's model, isn't some mystical force. It's an unconscious perception, a non-linear awareness of what could be, of what connects beneath the surface. Pair that with introversion, the inward-directed energy that processes everything internally, and you get a deeply rare personality. One that senses meaning behind every sentence, reads between the lines with little effort, knows the motive before the action. Someone who lives in layers, while the rest of the world seems content on the surface. And that difference, that fundamental gap in perception, becomes the source of silent suffering. Growing up too deep. For intuitive introverts, the struggle often begins early. Even as children, they ask unusual questions. Why do people lie when they don't have to? Why do adults smile with their mouths but not with their eyes? Why does no one talk about the things that actually matter? These children often confuse or frustrate teachers and parents. They're told they're too serious, too quiet, too intense. They notice contradictions. They recognize hypocrisy. They question what others accept. But instead of praise, they receive discomfort. Instead of validation, dismissal. And so they learn. Depth makes people uncomfortable. And from a young age, they begin to retreat. Not because they don't care, but because it seems like no one wants to know what they really see. They stop sharing their inner world, not because they have nothing to say, but because it feels like no one is truly listening. The masking begins. As they grow older, intuitive introverts adapt, not by becoming someone else, but by hiding more and more of themselves. They learn how to blend in. They nod through conversations that bore or disturb them. They laugh at jokes that don't feel funny. They smile when they want to scream, not because they're fake, but because the cost of being real is too high. When they do speak their truth, they're often met with blank stares, discomfort, or accusations of being too much. So they begin to filter. They dull the insight. They suppress the knowing. They minimize their depth just to survive. And slowly, the mask hardens. Until one day, they hear their voice in a crowd and don't recognize it. Until one day, they look in the mirror and wonder if their real self is still in there somewhere, or if they buried it too deep to retrieve. The shadow within. Carl Jung spoke often of the shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves we repress, deny, or disown. For the intuitive introvert, the shadow isn't always the dark or violent. Often, it's the light they've locked away, their clarity, their perception, their insight. They begin to hate their own intensity. They envy people who can live easily, casually, superficially. They try to be normal. They try to stop noticing, stop analyzing, stop feeling so much. But suppressing your core never leads to peace. It leads to psychic war. They feel split inside, the real self hiding, the false self surviving. And that internal tension becomes exhaustion, anxiety, burnout, and eventually, despair. Not because they're weak, but because they've carried something so heavy for so long, and no one around them even knows it exists. The breaking point. And then, something happens. A crisis, a heartbreak, a burnout so complete it leaves them shattered. The mask, once rigid, begins to crack, and through the crack, light gets in. The intuitive introvert, finally exhausted from pretending, stops apologizing. They stop minimizing their truth. They begin to express. They write, paint, meditate, not to escape, but to reconnect. They stop fearing their depth, and they begin to trust it. For the first time in a long time, they listen to themselves again, and in that moment, they remember. They were never broken. They were never too much. They were never the problem. They were simply trying to exist in a world that wasn't ready for their kind of awareness. From isolation to integration. Carl Jung taught that true healing doesn't come from perfection, but from integration. Wholeness is not the absence of darkness, it's the reunion with your full self. For intuitive introverts, this means reclaiming their silence, their stillness, their sensitivity. It means no longer rejecting what makes them rare. It means honoring their way of seeing the world, even when the world doesn't see them back. And when they do this, when they finally allow their perception to take up space again, they become something powerful. Not just thinkers, not just feelers, but bridges. Bridges between the seen and the unseen, between the conscious and unconscious, between what is and what could be. A gift the world may never understand. They write stories that reach the soul. They listen in ways that heal. They guide others through darkness, not because they read it in a book, but because they've lived in it. And they don't need to shout to be heard. Their clarity carries through vibration, not volume. Still, the loneliness doesn't vanish. There are still days when the weight feels too heavy. Still moments when they wish they could just unsee it all. But in those moments, a quiet truth rises. What if the curse was actually a calling? What if their difference is exactly what the world, this noisy, distracted, surface-driven world, desperately needs? Not more speed, not more ambition, but stillness, insight, awareness. If you've ever felt like your sensitivity was a flaw, if you've ever wondered why the world feels so loud, so fast, so shallow, while you crave stillness, meaning, and depth. If you've sensed emotions in others before they even speak, or noticed contradictions no one else seems to see, then this message is for you, because you are not broken, You are not weak, and you are certainly not alone. What you carry inside you, that perceptiveness, that deep inner world, that quiet clarity, it's not a defect. It's not too much. It's simply different. You are awake in a world that prefers to sleep, a world obsessed with performance over purpose, noise over nuance, validation over truth. And in that world, people like you, people who feel deeply, sense patterns, and ask the questions no one dares to say out loud, are often made to feel like outsiders. You've likely spent years trying to tone yourself down, to be normal, to not think so much, to not feel so intensely, to not notice every subtle shift in tone, body language, or intention. You've probably learned how to play along, to nod when you disagree, to smile when you're unraveling, to say, "I'm fine," when you're anything but. But deep down, something inside you always knew. You were never meant to live on the surface. You were made to reveal what's hidden, to sense what others miss, to name what others fear, to guide, to reflect, to heal. You are not just intuitive, you are insightful. Not just quiet, but attuned. Not just sensitive, but awake. And that's why your path has felt heavier than most, because when you see more than others do, you often carry more than they can understand. You absorb energies that aren't yours. You feel the sadness behind someone's smile. You sense the storm before it arrives, in people, in places, in situations. And when no one else sees what you see, it's easy to question your own clarity, to second-guess your instincts, to wonder, maybe I'm just imagining things. But what if you're not? What if your too much was never a flaw, but a signal? A signal that your perception has a purpose. Carl Jung understood this. He didn't just explore the unconscious, he charted it. He believed that healing doesn't come from perfection or pretending, but from integration. To become whole is to reclaim every part of yourself, even the ones you've tried to silence. Especially those. The quiet child who saw through the masks, the teenager who felt like an alien at every party, the adult who wondered why everyone was content with such empty conversations. That part of you was never wrong. It was early. It saw things before others were ready to, and that vision, painful as it can, you're the kind of person who feels the truth before it's spoken, who walks into a room and instantly knows who's hurting, who's hiding, who's pretending. And though that clarity can feel like a burden, it is also a rare form of wisdom. The world may never fully understand you. It may label you as intense, overthinker, too emotional, too quiet, too analytical, too sensitive. Let them, because you were not made to fit in. You were made to stand in your truth, calmly, firmly, and without apology. To hold space for the things that scare others. To dive into complexity when others flee to simplicity. To love with a depth that makes people feel seen for the first time. You are not broken. You are simply built for depth in a culture that idolizes surface. You were made to hold contradictions, to stand at the crossroads between light and dark, hope and despair, knowing and not knowing. To live in nuance while the world reaches for black and white answers. To question the obvious, not out of rebellion, but because your truth refuses to be boxed. You were not meant to accept what's given at face value. Your mind naturally peels back the layers, searching, sensing, connecting, seeing. And your soul? It doesn't crave certainty, it craves depth. And though this path may be lonely, and often is, it is not without purpose. The silence you've walked through wasn't punishment. It was shaping you, sharpening your insight, refining your ability to see what others miss. Your solitude was the soil, your pain the pressure, and your clarity, that is the diamond formed within. Because every time you felt too much, every time your words were misunderstood, or your feelings dismissed, or your presence labeled intense, you weren't being broken. You were being built. Built not to survive in the ordinary, but to lead in the unseen. Not with a podium or spotlight or applause, but with presence. That rare kind of presence that doesn't demand attention, it commands it. Not through volume, but through vibration. Through the quiet confidence of someone who knows who they are, even if the world never validates it. Your stillness is not weakness. It's strength disguised. It's wisdom in waiting. Your inner world, that vast, rich terrain, is not a distraction from life. It is life. And your intuition? It's not noise. It's your most honest compass. So stop shrinking. Stop folding yourself in half just to fit into rooms that were never meant to hold your full self. Stop apologizing for your insight, maybe by that child who walks through the world, wide-eyed and misunderstood, wondering if anyone else feels as much as they do. You are not here by accident. You are a thread in a much bigger pattern. One that doesn't need you to be louder, faster, simpler. It needs you to be real. And though the world may not always thank you, though you may never trend or go viral or be applauded for what you carry, this world will be better because you were here. Because you bring something sacred into a world addicted to noise. You bring stillness. You bring insight. You bring truth. You will never be just another person. You'll never live on autopilot. You'll never skim the surface, because your eyes, they see. Your heart, it feels, and your soul, even in its weariness, still whispers, "Don't stop, there's more here." And yes, it gets exhausting. You'll have days where you wish you could unfeel, unsee, unknow. You'll envy those who live easily, casually, without this depth pressing on their chest. You'll want to trade your insight for peace, your questions for comfort. But then something will happen. Someone will say, "You helped me understand myself," or "No one ever listened like you did," or "You put into words what I couldn't say." And in that moment, you'll remember, you were never the problem. You were the quiet answer in a loud, chaotic world. Carl Jung understood this. He knew that the soul does not find healing in perfection, but in integration, in reclaiming every part of you, even the ones others ask you to hide. So don't erase yourself to fit in. Don't dull your edges to be palatable. Don't trade your truth for their comfort. You were not made for shallow water. You were made for the deep end. And while others may fear that depth, you were born to navigate it. You are not here to follow trends. You're here to follow truth. You're not here to conform. You're here to awaken. You are the gentle voice that speaks what no one else dares to say. You are the mirror that reflects not just who people are, but who they could be. You are the bridge between the unconscious and the conscious, between what is and what could be. And while the world may never fully understand your depth, it needs it. Desperately. Not more speed, not more noise, not more surface. It needs presence. It needs perception. It needs people who can feel the undercurrent and not be swept away. People like not too sensitive, just finely tuned. Not too emotional, just deeply human. Not too strange, just uniquely aware. You are not an error in the system. You are the reminder that the system is broken. You are not here to adapt to a shallow world. You are here to deepen it. You are not here to erase your complexity. You are here to embody it fully, so that others can finally feel safe to do the same. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be honored. So, be the quiet observer. Be the thoughtful feeler. Be the gentle mirror. Be the deep soul in a world that fears stillness. Because the truth is this: you were never lost. You were simply ahead. You were never broken. You were simply built differently. And you were never alone. Not now. Not ever. You belong. Not because you fit in, but because you reveal what no one else dares to see. And that, dear soul, is more than enough.